Hello, and welcome to the Mindmatrix Sales Enablement Maturity Assessment and Planning webinar. Today's host is Craig Nelson, Sales Enablement Thought Leader. Joining him is Eric Bodock, Vice President of Marketing at Mindmatrix. With that, I'll be handing this over to Eric.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate the introduction. Let me give you a little bit more background on Mr. Nelson. Craig's been putting in effort and working on sales enablement for the past 15 years. He was the originator of SalesEnablement.com way back in 1998. Back then, he started this with the belief that sales enablement is the foundation of any B2B sales organization, and we're seeing a lot of that acceleration today, where sales enablement in both large and small organizations is taking hold and adoption is rapidly accelerating. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Craig.
Eric, thanks, and welcome everybody to today's session. Hopefully, we're going to come away here with some ideas for you to put in play immediately. If you're doing sales enablement or planning sales enablement, we're going to have some takeaways here that will apply to both. The idea today is to keep it pretty interactive between Eric and I. We're going to talk about topics such as the meaning, not a universal meaning for sales enablement, but what's it going to mean to your organization? What are the trends that you can pick up on today and sort of capitalize to drive adoption for sales enablement? Creation of a blueprint, and this is going to be a way in which you can convey what sales enablement is to your organization, across your organization. A maturity model, and we're pretty excited about that because that's a way for companies to put a stake in the ground and move forward and evolve over time. We'll hit on that later in the session. We're certainly going to talk about technology, and then finally the payback for this, and that's going to help you to garner further interest and then further buy-in for doing sales enablement. So Eric, those are the topics. Let's get to it.
Sounds great, Craig.
So from a company perspective, give you a brief on who we are so you know where we're coming from. We have been in business for over 15 years, have done well over 100 deployments, and have gleaned a tremendous amount. When you work with companies that are sales forces of 5, they go to 50, they go to 500, you learn a lot, and we've worked with companies like that. We've also worked with companies that have worked through channel partners. It's a bit of a different animal, but also extremely important to get sales enablement right for those that sell indirect. And we've worked with companies that have started with no channel partners, went to 10, 20, hundreds, if not thousands of channel partners. Again, we've learned a lot. So our intent today is talk not just about some of the companies over there to the left that we've learned from, but also talk about some of the partners that we perceive to be critical to the enablement deployment that you might be embarking on. Best-in-class companies like SiriusDecisions, Salesforce, and others that you see there that we've worked with, and how they come together to deliver a holistic solution.
So Craig, and we're going to try to keep this as interactive as possible, so I'm going to be going back and forth with Craig, asking some questions. More of a roundtable type approach to this webinar. So let's start it off by talking about what the big deal is. I mean, from a business perspective, why should companies pay attention to sales enablement? What's the focus?
Well, the focus in the end is going to be revenue growth. And for those companies that are embarking on full-blown sales transformation projects, or let's say your company is simply trying to get better at onboarding new reps, sales enablement applies to both. And this particular question that we're seeing here, executives would believe that there's two ways of driving that revenue growth. If you look at it in its most simplistic form, one is going to be to restructure, replace, maybe add people. That's sort of a traditional approach. And then, by the way, this question came as a result of a sales enablement forum where about 15 of us vendors were talking about, how to make an impact on revenue growth. And we said, look, you got to move away from number one, and you got to look at number two. And I think we've all been part, Eric, of companies that, if you look back, a few years, how many VPs of sales have you had? Have you had turnover in the marketing and the CMO ranks? A lot of companies have tried number one, but the focal point of today's webinar and this group that we were talking with, our focal point was how do you systemize and put in place the foundation for success so that you can really onboard better and going forward systemize so that you can get better each year, year on year through a system, not relying just on people.
Yeah, number two seems a lot more fun for us to talk about today than number one, and a lot more effective in the long term, obviously, too.
Yes, I'd agree.
So, sales enablement, what does it mean? Isn't sales enablement something we've been doing for a while? Is it really something new? I mean, it feels like we've been doing aspects of sales enablement for the past, 15, 20 years.
Companies that look at this as something new, really the title is new. And this is my opinion here, I guess, Eric, more than anything else. The title is new. You see it now in people's job role descriptions, maybe their formal title. That might be new, but the concepts behind sales enablement are not. And what's interesting is that when you come into a company and do an assessment, we've done hundreds of these, you can very quickly get a sense for where they stand in the maturity model of sales enablement. Again, they may not call it that. But the idea is this. The first thing that you need to agree on is it's not just about efficiency. It's also about effectiveness. Right? If you take a look at the messenger, and this model here is a great way to illustrate this point. If you look at the messenger, that's your salesperson. That is your channel partner. That could also be your services people that are out, in an expand deal kind of scenario. Those are the people that are delivering your message. Are they both efficient and effective today? Could you look to go 20%, 30% more in revenue without adding feet in the street? I've seen clients do that. And the traditional way of doing it in the 90s was feet in the street, let's add to it. Now it's how do we get more effective on the street? If you look at the left
Absolutely.
here, this is one of the challenges, right, Eric? And that is, and then you take a look at the challenge that messenger has, and how does sales enablement impact this? In other words, how can we align the company to make sure that all the messaging, which could be not hundreds but thousands of documents and videos and tools, make it to that messenger so they deliver the right information to that right buyer?
I couldn't agree more. You can definitely see, things are changing, and I think that's a good lead into our next slide too. Talking about trends and challenges, it feels like, the way that marketing and sales needs to operate and should be operating has changed a good bit. There's new market trends that are impacting that. There's challenges that marketing and sales need to be aligned in order to effectively address. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Sure, and to start here, there certainly is a change management aspects to sales enablement deployments. When you want to take wherever you're at today and move forward, you have to take a look at market drivers, such as the ones listed here, to really get the mind share of those in the field as well as those in corporate. And we're going to talk now, Eric, about each one of the four here. And I'm sure as people look at this, you can't disagree at this point, right? Buyers are smarter. Information needs to find the seller. Social is certainly becoming more and more commonplace and part of everybody's day. And then finally, systemizing. These are things that capitalize right now to gain mind share. So let's talk about how you make that happen.
So yeah, let's start by talking about number one. We talk about smarter buyers. As a marketing person, I've definitely seen, kind of a sales process turn into more of a buyer's journey. This process, this sales process / buyer's journey, who actually controls this today?
The quick answer there is that I think most would agree in B2B selling that the buyer is in control for lots of reasons, and really many of the right reasons as well. So you can't really argue with that. And one of the things you're going to notice as you look at this model here, we're going from a model where information made its way through our sales force to the buyer. Now look at the opposite. Look at the buyer basically self-messaging, and they're finding that content, the videos, the references, the analyst viewpoints. They're finding this on their own. They're going by way of LinkedIn, Twitter, different knowledge-based systems that we show in the middle there. And because of that, the game has changed, right? They're suddenly much more informed. When they enter into that very first conversation with that seller, they understand quite a bit more sometimes than the seller themselves, and that puts the seller at a disadvantage. So I think this one here is a done deal. This is something that most can't argue with. Buyers are smarter. Now, one thing that I will say here, though, Eric, and that's they might be smarter, at this point in some cases, but they also, in many cases, are confused because of the overwhelming amount of information that they have in front of them.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, we live in this content marketing is king kind of world. Huge amounts of information that are being pushed at potential buyers, and I think, you know, sellers, people that are trying to sell a product or a service, you know, become more of advisors, right? And as part of being advisors, it seems like there's this alignment between sales and marketing and understanding this buyer's journey. Can we dig a little deeper on that?
We can, and as I'm going through these game changers, as we're referring to them here, Eric, the idea is to capitalize on this. Again, if your salespeople would agree that, look, I've got to change and upgrade my game, great, capitalize on that. At the same time, you know, ask questions around something else that's changed, and that's understanding the gaps in that buyer's process. And one of the stats that's out there today that I certainly agree with is if you provide a better buying experience, you could possibly double revenues in certain kind of opportunities, you know, simply because people stick with your sellers, not somebody else's. And that's a survey that was done last year about the buying process and providing a better one than your competitors. So job one is identify the way in which people consume your product, your messaging, and buy. Job two in this case, Eric, is going to be taking a look at the outcome of better relationships, because in the end, sales enablement is about empowering your customer-facing roles, your sales roles, to build better relationships, and that's not just connecting with them, but also building credibility, building trust. Another key point here, Eric, is that as you're looking at that journey, it's not just the job of marketing or sales, it's clearly the job of both. And with some of the best sales enablement deployments that I've seen over the years, the circles that you see here have almost united and come together. Sales and marketing are right lockstep in understanding each of the stages that we show here in the buyer's journey, and understand that each play a role in connecting with buyers and advancing these buyers on the way through that journey.
I would agree with that 100%. And it kind of leads us right into, you know, game changer number two, Craig, which is this idea of, you know, how things have changed a little bit as far as resources and tools. I know, you know, looking back on my marketing career and go back a number of years, and, you know, in marketing we posted assets to the sales portal, and then we posted separate partner portal assets, and we used email as a distribution mechanism to catch the rest, you know, along with some other kind of point solutions. Can you talk to me, Craig, about you know, what's needed today?
Well, there's no question that gone are the days of build it and they will come, right? That was the old approach, and that approach now, I mean, you have to sort of change your mindset to content actually finds the seller, and thinking through that way, you can really target in on this problem of information overload, because again, the shift has gone from build and they will come to the sales portal to the content finding the seller and also finding the buyer, by the way. If you can make that transfer, and I think you have to do it from a process standpoint, then a technology standpoint. If you can make that error, you'll overcome this information overload, which, by the way, this diagram that you were looking at here hasn't changed much over the last decade. This challenge has been with us. It's only gotten worse, and it's gotten worse because of the production of and the volume of content. Also, there's a new element there, and that's the social element. So social now is playing a huge role. So now you've got your seller in the middle there, you know, virtually overwhelmed with information. You know, the question is let's say the seller comes in this morning, and let me put this in the context of a real sales opportunity, right? And let's say this afternoon they're going to be going on a call to an insurance company. The CMO role is who they're going to be calling on, and they know there's two competitors. Really, a game changer here is if you can profile an opportunity or even pull that information out of the CRM and then put in front of that particular seller, right, on their mobile device on their way to the call, what are the 5 things that are going to be most useful? And in some companies, that's taking it from 500 down to 5 items. Others, it's taking it from 5,000 down to 5 items. But that mindset shift of that information, once you understand that deal, finding the seller, is a critical critical item to leverage. And if you do that effectively, you'll see almost 100% turnout of sellers. They'll be using this before, during, and after sales calls if you can make this shift.
So speaking, Craig, of things that sales teams should be doing, social selling. I think we use it effectively here at Mindmatrix. It works well for us. But I often have people asking me, where's the beef with social selling? A lot of people think there's a lot of buzz, but a lot of false starts. What do you think? Do you think it's lived up to expectations?
Well, I think it can live up to expectations, but it has to be managed. You can't just make it available. And what I've seen is plenty of false starts where social becomes what people are rating content or assets, or maybe it's a discussion that's going on about an asset. That's pretty limited. You really want to kind of changing gears here to the real value of social to the seller. As a seller, you want to build your bench. So the question becomes, how can I use the sales enablement platform? And salespeople want this today, right? They want to be earlier on in deals. They want to leverage external social feeds like LinkedIn, Twitter, SlideShare, you name it. Well, to use that, you have to give them reusable pieces of information, right? Messages, content components, whatever you call them. And in doing that, now they're bringing the weight of your company forward to these different social channels, if you will. And you're able to say, look, I have found now a discussion within LinkedIn on this topic. Let me take that content component, publish it, let me track who's using it, let me get a sense for where this conversation is going. And then as people are clicking into my profile, they're getting a sense for me as a thought leader, not so much as a salesperson. That's a critical win, I should say. And that, again, is building my bench. I want to be able to pull from information being posted to the system from product management, marketing, you name it roles, subject matter experts, maybe sales engineer roles. I want to be able to leverage that information and do team-based selling. And that's bringing it to that next level, Eric.
Got it, Craig. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the organization. Do organizations really have all the resources necessary to make sales enablement happen? It seems like there's a lot of great things here, but do we have the people? Do we have the resources? Tell me what you think.
Well, I got a couple of ideas here. First of all, I would contest in almost every company I've come into over the years, there's resources in place right now, and they're not maybe doing something that's titled sales enablement, but they're doing the activities that are behind sales enablement. Whether it be people that are behind training, maybe the sales kickoff training, the boot camp training. These are people doing enablement. It could be managers that are onboarding and coaching people on how to configure and price an opportunity. So it's being done today. Again, maybe not on the title and the label for sales enablement, but that's not really, my concern. One of the huge, and I think this is a nice momentum shift for this market of sales enablement is look into LinkedIn, and you see the stats there. And this is, an increase over March of 2013, the numbers that you're looking at there. It went from thousands of people with sales enablement in their title, their job description, to well over 100,000. I've seen a surge of groups. I think it's now 38 or 39 groups discussing sales enablement. Sales enablement shows up in well over 355 company profiles. But the point being is this, is that there's plenty of mindshare now around this topic. And in some cases, it's company-sponsored, but oftentimes, Eric, in many cases, it's not company-sponsored. And these are the people that at a grassroots level are now driving this. And again, this is a great sign for sales enablement, that the momentum has now shifted to it, and companies are doing it both top-down and bottom-up.
Thanks, Craig. So we talked about the buzz around sales enablement, sales transformation. Looking at the skills of the individual reps, what does this mean for them? And as a marketing person, how can marketing be more effective in helping the salesperson make this transformation, or become a more effective sales advisor instead of quote unquote a salesperson? Really, how can marketing help in this process?
Well, think back to the graphic that I used earlier, where we had the marketing and sales bubbles, and their responsibility, which was to take somebody who, let's say that I, the salesperson, have connected with and help me to build credibility and then ultimately trust. Right? That needs to happen every day of every week. And for me to do that, the salesperson, I need to really become an advisor. And this is a term that more and more people are beginning to use here, and kind of shifting again the mentality away from building relationships, which by the way is a one-to-one of selling. And I mean that's the one-to-one of selling for engaging and relating and prospecting and doing some storytelling. You have to have that. That's sort of the price of admission in selling. But where we want to bring each one of these new salespeople to, including our partners, is going to be to a point in which they're asking better questions, they're differentiating from the very beginning, and ultimately selling value over price. And Eric, for the best of the best, they take it to the next level here. They're advising and elevating. And again, this is a responsibility of the organization, right? Enablement is not a training group thing or a sales group thing. It's an organization thing. That said, take a look at the top there, right? If our sellers now are given the business acumen to reach buyers that are unaware of business problems, those are some great new opportunities. If they're perceived as subject matter experts, good news for them. They're going to get callbacks when they leave messages. If they're viewed as being problem solvers, now you've actually given that prospective buyer a reason to advance the opportunity. And then ultimately, as they stay engaged in, and many companies do a land and expand strategy, if you can land, make them successful through your team, and then ultimately, see the expand deal, everybody wins. So the 12 skills here may vary based on product, based on company. But Eric, the key thing is that it's a company responsibility. Anything we can do to bring our reps from being where they're at today to being viewed as advisors to buyers, that means that we're in more games than others, and we stay in the game too.
Very insightful. Very helpful, I think. And it's not even a transformation challenge just for sales, like you were saying. It's a transformation challenge for the organization as sales processes move to more of a buyer's journey. And marketing, being a marketing guy, focusing in on that, it definitely sounds like we have our role to play to make sure sales advisors have the skills and the assets they need, whether it be teaching or providing content, but then also just supporting them with metrics and coaching as they move forward. So let's talk a little bit more about this sales enablement blueprint. So you've been involved in over 100 deployments, I would say, over the last X number of years, and they say 10,000 hours makes you an expert. So I'm sure you got a lot of great things you can share with us about creating this sales enablement blueprint and the components that are necessary to have in place, not just for success, but let's say for great success.
Right, and to clarify, it's not just my experience with over 100 companies. It's a team that I've worked with over the years, Eric, and it's not just our organization as a vendor, but it's multiple organizations, multiple vendors that have delivered on much more of a holistic view on sales enablement. One of the things that I find as I read through data sheets and fact sheets and white papers is that it tends to stop the discussion around sales enablement here. And we're going to dig into each one of these areas here, Eric, because ultimately in the end, you can be successful with sales enablement with some better content and maybe a better delivery vehicle, the technology. But where if you really want to make an impact, if you can align people and process, combine that with better content and better technology, you're going to have a huge impact. Now, not only increasing the top line revenue number, but also decreasing that bottom line cost. And those are two things as we're going through this that once we get into the details, we're going to speak more to.
So let's talk about people. We touched on a little bit. Really, the whole company is involved. Marketing is involved. Let's talk about how other people contribute.
Well, to start, Eric, you can see there the buying process. And by the way, whether it's 7 stages, 5 stages, I'm not so concerned about that when we sit down and talk to our deployment clients. What we're more interested in understanding, first of all, is whatever that process might be, let's take a look at strengths and weaknesses. As a company, are you great once somebody engages with you? Hence, you're very good at exploring options, evaluating options, those buying steps. And then maybe you fade out in the later stages. That's pretty common, by the way. Are you basically absent in stages 1, 2, and 3? That's basically the social selling arena, right, where you're doing the outreach, through various social platforms. Again, there's several out there to connect with buyers. So that's the first thing we want to understand is what's the buyer journey look like? Where are you strong and where are you weak? And once we understand that, that's typically where we take a look at the roles and say, well, bottom line is that we're simply not empowering salespeople to publish to the social platforms. Hence, we're weak in 1 and 2. So what can we put in place for that?
Is that where you see most people struggle?
I do. It's on that front end, 1 through 3, and it's really subject in some cases not just the organization but the people in the field. I have seen some people in the field that picked up on LinkedIn, a number of years ago. They started building out their profile, showing themselves as advisor, engaging in conversations and really incubating deals on their own, Eric. And now, as companies engage in helping the sellers, they're getting broader adoption of more sellers doing, steps 1 and 2 here. And the other struggle I've seen, Eric, is on the latter stages here, right? There's more buyer teams involved, including purchasing, hence the return on investment, customer testimonials, those things sometimes are lean, and those need to be shored up. But ultimately, in the end, Eric, look at the people there. It's really, again, an organizational thing, right? So if you take a look at, let's say, doing better onboarding, better product launches, better social selling, those 3 things that we've talked about here, combine that with getting buy-in of what product management, marketing, sales ops, training, what each are going to do in playing a role in this. Once you get that alignment, I've actually seen companies decrease the amount of workload, decrease their cost because of all the redundant work that was going on. And so when you do the alignment, when you do this mapping, there's an upside in really reducing things that just don't matter.
Yeah, and I think we'd all be happy if we were just as effective or even more effective while having less stuff to do, which leads us nicely into this concept of content technology. I know as a marketing person, Craig, I build a ton of content, especially in this day and age of content marketing. So we do create a lot of content, but the question is then what? How do we make sure it's used? How do we know which content's most effective? How do we cull the ineffective content, and how are we sure we're not culling stuff that's really important? Let's talk a little bit more about that.
A term that I like a lot, and this was used by one of our clients years ago, was establishing a single source of truth. And saying that, it means a lot, right? If I'm in sales, if I'm a channel partner, I don't go to 5 different, 10 different places, right, to get what I need to get my job done. So that's the first thing, that when you look at the technology element here, it's best to understand. Provide a single source, and in doing so, just make it easier for the seller. The other thing that I've seen is a tremendous investment has been made, in CRM, and then the shift to go on demand with CRM, and then the upgrade to full marketing automation, demand gen, lead scoring, that type of thing. Combine those 2 investments that many companies have already made with Sales Enablement. That really is your dream team. Once you've connected those, and then you put in place a process and integration, now you've got that single source of truth through that buyer journey we're showing across the top here, Eric. And that's from a technology standpoint. The other thing, if you want people to come back not once a day, you want people to come back on the hour, is get a steady stream of content, right? Delegate content publishing down through your thought leaders, your product management, your marketing people. Do that, and then basically people will look at, in this case here, your Sales Enablement platform is the go-to place. They're not going to, I've seen it all, right? Wikis, emails, believe it or not, FTP sites, you name it. Dating myself here a bit, Eric. But, you see them going to 10 different places where if they can combine the technologies we're showing here with better content, they'll come here.
So we have those 4 components, and I think this slide attempts to pull those 4 components together, and hopefully does a pretty good job. Let's talk about this Sales Enablement blueprint here. How do you use this blueprint? How would you use this blueprint in the deployment, or if you are running Sales Enablement in a company, how would you use something like this to outline the overall view of what the company should and could be doing?
The first thing to think about is Sales Enablement certainly is not a tactical initiative, right? It's very much a strategic initiative. And for those companies that embrace this idea that the combination of the four elements, understanding the buyer's journey, the technology components, the content, the people, companies that really embrace those four elements, they're the ones that are going to have a true asset to their company. And so that's the first point, is that, use this to align the organization on what's needed. The other thing, Eric, is that, use this as the poster, the promotion poster of, here's where we're going, right? We've tried different sales methodologies over the years. This is the one we're going to use going forward. We've had different technology components. Here, how's we're going to bring them together. We've had content in different places, again, centralized. We've got people all contributing. Use this as a promotion vehicle to say, as a company, here's where we're going. And we're not going to do this overnight, but there's going to be less confusion around a salesperson coming in the morning and saying, really, another login, another sales process, content that isn't consistent. I've heard a little bit of everything, right? Or, somebody saying, all right, that's not my job. That's, not something I provide to marketing or sales or what have you. Once you get a buy-in on this, then you basically have that foundation to move forward with. So this is a great way to promote what you're doing with sales enablement. I've seen companies that have 50 people in sales. I've seen companies that have had 50,000 channel partners use this. Really companies of all size want to gain agreement on what it's going to take to make this work.
So that I think leads us nicely into this concept of a sales enablement maturity model. It seems like a lot of these companies of different sizes are spending time trying to understand where they are, and then they're spending time trying to figure out how to gauge process or progress. Well, both, really. So when you talk about sales enablement maturity and you meet with the companies, how do you help them assess where they are? How do you help them assess where they could be?
This is a really important, and I'm excited to talk about this slide here, Eric, because there really hasn't been out there a single sort of, if you will, step-by-step approach. I don't want to say cookbook, right, but step-by-step approach of getting better over time, right, doing process improvement. In fact, if you look at this is actually based on Carnegie Mellon's work years ago on CMM, Capability Maturity Model. And it was based off of that, but then specialized for sales enablement. When we looked at across many companies that have done sales enablement and have done it right, those companies would largely agree that for the most part they started in a random fashion, right? Everybody kind of did their own thing. The way in which you onboarded reps depended on the quarter. The way in which you launched product depended on the product manager. The way in which you ran campaign and messaging, again, depended on that individual. So most companies, Eric, start in a level 0 or a level 1. And if you do this, if you put a stake in the ground and say, we're here today, in the next 30 to 60 days we want to have initial. And then what initial is going to be is we've got alignment of high-value use cases. Let's say there are 5 different sales enablement use cases. We're going to nail them. We're going to do social selling better, coaching better, onboarding better, product launch better. And as an organization, you're now at level 1. Level 2, and then by the way, this isn't going to be rocket science here because this is just going to start to happen. Level 2 is as you're doing that work now in a more predictable fashion, you're seeing repeatability of success, and you're also beginning to see pruning of things that simply don't work. That gets a point to repeatable. And if a company's at repeatable, now they have the people, process, content, technology understood. Once you're there, Eric, now we begin to look at, all right, let's take a look at a defined way of doing business. Every time we launch to our channel partners, this is the way we do business. Direct, we do business. When we launch a solution, we do it like this. When we do a tactical, let's say upgrade to an existing product, we do that. Now we're getting to define. And the reason why defined is so crucial is that it's really hard to get better without metrics, but it's almost impossible for those metrics to mean anything without a defined approach, right? You have to have a defined approach and then in turn metrics to improve. You can't get better without metrics, but again, you have to have a defined approach, and that's where levels 4 and 5 come into play. If you can get to a point to where you're repeating the way in which you launch new products and messaging, for example, you should know within weeks, not the forecast 6 months from today, weeks, if it's being picked up on in the field. Months, whether or not your salespeople are able to really resonate with buyers. And then within a couple of quarters, you'll get a sense for what things you simply shouldn't do anymore. And then once you get to level 5, by the way, Eric, I've never seen a level 5 organization with sales enablement, but I have seen companies that do have a repeatable, defined way of doing business. So they know within weeks of a product launch where they stand and in what areas to tweak, then move forward. So a huge gain on moving up each one of these levels here.
Understood. Yeah, it seems like level 5 is something to strive for. Let's talk about quickly an example from a workshop, if you can give us a little overview of that.
I'm not going to go into each one of the points that are listed here, Eric. I really just wanted to put up a sampling. When we sit down with organizations, we truly want to know 4 key things. We want to understand the organization and its business goal. Is it reducing the cost and producing profitable revenue? Is it increasing top line and gaining market share? Based on those 2 big questions, Eric, that's going to really drive the direction in which you're going to take sales enablement. And that's why I discourage this idea of a universal term for sales enablement. It's going to be based on what's your business trying to accomplish in the next 3, 6, 9 months or 2 years. So that's number 1. Number 2, let's assess people, process, content, technology, and then be truly honest. Do we have a union mentality here where everybody does just exactly what they believe they need to be doing to be successful, or is there a cross-functional buy-in for what it's going to take to get that new product in the hands of new clients? So we do an assessment of people, process, content, technology. Number 3, identify those gaps and do something about it, which is going to be done over time. And then finally, and if you could move to the next slide, take a look at what the payback is. And as we get into what the payback is, there's another thing that I wanted to make sure I also brought up here, Eric, and that's, what the technology is. And Eric, something you mentioned earlier was, the build it and they will come era of sales portals. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is technology, and you can see some of the capabilities listed there on the right. Technology.
Yeah, I think this gives us sorry to interrupt there, Craig. I think this gives us a great overview of kind of the steps before we dig into the payback. This gives us a great overview of the steps, right, where we can look at and say, how do you start? Well, ramping up staff and opportunities, right? So, a little more detail on that, if you don't mind.
Well, think about, in this case, putting it into simplistic terms. If you look at what it takes to be successful in sales, you're learning as you go. And if you could put a sales enablement platform in place, that brings a rep to a point in which they're selling and learning and being coached and closing and then doing it again. If you have step 1 here in place, now we're talking about a reduction in ramp-up time. You're talking about people selling value over price early on. And we worked with one client in particular that said they had a 2.5-year learning curve for new reps coming on board, and they wanted to cut that in half, and they did. They also went from a portal that was being used 20-30% of the time to one being used 80-90% of the time, because that information, as you see in step 2 here, was beginning to find those sellers as they were doing the selling. And this sort of ties that point together of how do we bring a rep from a relationship builder to having some of those 12 skills we talked about earlier here and being an advisor. Well, in the end, it's a little bit the way that Siri works, right? Is you should be able to profile an opportunity and then have the platform basically come back and tell you, the sales enablement platform tell you, what content, what training, what videos to reference. I don't want to push this idea, but even as you're walking into the sales call, you're learning. As you're sitting on the flight on the way in, you're learning. And then finally, and I think this is the part that's overlooked in most sales enablement deployments today, and I can say that I haven't seen a pretty good number, and that is spending energy around not just closing deals, but also closing the way in which deals are being done and providing real-time coaching. And this is where sales management plays a crucial part of this entire process, because ultimately that's where we're going to be closing the loop on all of this, where let's come back now and take a look at what gaps exist. Do we have the wrong references, the right references? We want to know what's causing us to win deals and lose deals. And the final slide that we're going to get into here is that payback, but I wanted to make sure that I spend enough time on that technology slide because, quite frankly, what I've seen over the years is people get hung up on the technology. Take a step back and just make sure, again, you're onboarding right, you're selling right, you're coaching right. And then finally here, Eric, a couple of ideas that you might want to set the stage for this slide as well.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about it. It was a good lead-in for addressing gaps. There's going to be some investment and some time put forth into, the sales enablement process, the technology, the people, the content, right? But I think the important thing when we're talking to executives, whether we're talking to them personally or whether people that are implementing sales enablement at a company are talking to their executives, it's about how do you get buy-in. And buy-in really, in a lot of cases, turns into, payback. And we touched on this a little bit before, but let's talk about payback as you step up the levels. I mean, it seems like, with the right implementations, you can actually spend less over time and be more effective in driving revenues.
Well, you can actually spend less over time, and you can begin to reduce. Let me take a very simplistic example, and rather than go through every one of these levels here and the payback off to the right there, what I'd rather do, Eric, is take a look at payback by organizational group. I've seen some companies where marketing used to produce somewhere near to 90% more content than they do today. In other words, they've cut the amount of content that they do by 90% because now they're doing the high-value content, and they're doing it in a content component, a very modular way. So in a sense, they're giving sales truly what they need because they've, over time, defined the way they were doing it, measured it, and they found what was working and what's not, as opposed to just throwing more up on the wall. So marketing, you could look to, and I'd say on an average, cut your content development possibly in half, especially if you go more modular. So that's the marketing win front. On the sales front, sales management, right, very challenging to manage the number, be doing business, and be ramping up new staff. What if you could ramp up your staff in half the amount of time? Right, the minute you receive that offer letter, as a salesperson, you should moments after be receiving a link to the Sales Enablement platform that basically says, start your journey here. And I've seen companies do that. And if you can do that, now you have sales management back to selling, not onboarding reps. More importantly, you've got reps on the phones faster. So if you can reduce your prep time, let's say it's 3 to 6 to 9 months for onboarding somebody, let's say you can do that now in half the amount of time. Another key win as you look through this is that let's say the organization is truly optimized to the buyer. Now you've got a better buyer experience. Another key thing here is turnover. If you look at the way in which companies do over price, more people making their number, obviously you're going to have less turnover. And those are some of the highlights, but I wanted to define those by group. You can also, as another exercise, define it by level and really get buy-in by those that might be more on the financial side of the business, the CFO and so on. And watch map how they were going to go from one level to the next over time and the expected results. And obviously you need to be fluid with this. It does change over time, Eric. But at least now you're putting a stake in the ground and you're allowing the company to get better over time.
I think that's a great overview of Payback. Well, we've reached the end of the webinar today. We have a couple minutes here before we get into questions. I thought you could go through kind of a checklist summary, and then we'll open it up for questions.
And if you haven't already done so, please do take a moment at this point here to submit your questions through GoToWebinar. Would love to keep this interactive here in the final couple points. What I wanted to do, Eric, was really do a net summary. I've gleaned a lot over the years. I've watched companies grow revenues while reducing cost of sale. For companies that struggle with that SG&A cost, when you look at these income statements, companies spend a tremendous amount of money on enablement. What if you could define the goals and the high-value use cases and cut out the 2/3 of the noise that's out there, whether it be the process, content, the training, whatever it is that doesn't provide value? That's job one. Number two is take advantage of some of the game changers. Mobility, for example, the mobile devices today, again, salespeople love the opportunity to learn as they're selling. Use mobile devices for that. The blueprint, crucial. If you create this blueprint, you're going to reduce confusion from day one. When you have the conversation and somebody's asking the question, what do I use, CRM, marketing automation, sales enablement? The answer is yes, but now you're going to have a roadmap to show them how. Develop that maturity plan. I think the maturity plan, I don't want to get preachy here, but the maturity plan gives you a sense to tell the organization, look, this isn't going to happen overnight. And as we bring the organization forward, we're going to see value in the first month, the first 3 months, the first 6 months. And basically what you're doing is you're creating that, this client used this term years ago, I love this term, Eric, rolling thunder. And that is, there's this groundswell where the partner will come back and say, look, that last product launch, we want more like that. Or the salesperson will say, that onboarding program, I was on more sales calls faster than any other, past job that I've had. You want that kind of, commentary going on in the field, and the only way to do that is by introducing, a better way of doing selling and marketing over time. So use a roadmap to introduce things over time. So hopefully that gives people an opportunity to register a few questions, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Craig. I think this was informative. Hopefully the whole audience thought it was informative. We'll be taking questions now, and I also want to remind you that you can email us at any time at sales@mindmatrix.net. Follow us on Twitter at Mindmatrix, or just reach out to us via the phone. So with that, let's open it up for questions.